What if I told you New Eridu just finished one of the most brutal events in all of its history? Yet it's one of the most least discussed topics in the entire world. Even while living in the dystopian future, the city itself, and even humanity as far as it goes, carries a case record soaked in blood. Were incredibly unfortunate events that would later end with violent riots, uprisings, and an outright war that is still possibly going on to this very day. What's up everyone, my name is Sekai, and today we look at one of the most interesting timeline points out of all of Zenless Zone Zero, where a desperate plea for equality and need for safety has turned the last bastion of humanity into a place full of moral dilemmas and controversy. We are going to be talking about the Oni. But before we can peel back the events of a literal civil war, I think it's best to take a look at just what even is the Oni race in the first place, as there is plenty of misconceptions on who they really are. These massive hulking humanoids are not tyrants. Instead, they are indeed their own special unique race of individuals, born with special stylized demonic traits burned directly into their DNA. Sometimes they are red, sometimes blue, or even yellow. Horns seem to grow regardless of whether they are male or female, as well as their biology having some very interesting aspects, such as the ability to both mature and age at a far slower rate than humans do. For example, little Soukaku isn't just some cute little 10-year-old girl. She herself is actually stated to be a good bit older than her quote-unquote older sister Yanagi. Their organs seem to be much more well adapted and stronger than that of a human, with Soukaku's rather unsettlingly huge appetite and her ability to clean entire plates of Rina's home-cooked meals, which would have absolutely killed a normal person if it wasn't for her having a powerful liver easily capable of detoxing her entire body. In fact, if you were to tie in her incredibly superhuman-like strength and her advanced characteristics, you can get a pretty scary idea of what Soukaku might look like one day when she's all grown up. As remember, she wields practically a buster sword effortlessly with one arm before she can even color within the lines in her coloring book. Even while they might look scary, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are. In fact, Soukaku's sister looked very well kempt even in her sickly dying days. So why aren't they trusted? And where's the rest of them? When New Eridu first rose from the ashes of the old capital, a slew of regulations and even arguably unjust rulings had came into effect. However, the citizens of the city themselves were able to slowly crawl back into living their lives again. Humans went back to school, hollows were drove back, and thanks to the morally questionable mining of porcelain, the economy skyrocketed to an all-time high. Yet even with all of this, the Oni were left behind. For unknown reasons, we would learn that the race seems to have been entirely blacklisted from being allowed citizenship within New Eridu, and entire families would be refused from entrance to living a better life, or even in some cases, would be treated as second-class citizens, seen as dirty or primal in nature, meaning low pay, denial of housing, or even blatant hatred towards them as a people. Yet other races such as Tyrant and even outright AI like artificial constructs would be granted citizenship on a whim. Yeah, you heard that right. Robots would be seen as citizens before living, breathing people with families. This absolutely would not go quietly. Overnight, civil unrest would explode throughout the city. The Oni, seemingly living in a tribal-like lifestyle, would arm themselves into masks of war and would lead specialized attacks directly against the New Eridu Defense Force. And while sadly details on the conflict are still scarce, we know that while they were mainly working in guerrilla warfare and as small bands of militia rebel groups, severe casualties were found on both sides of the war. While civil unrest and combat would become a growing concern, somewhere around 3 to 4 years prior to the main events of the story, the New Eridu Defense Force would grow tired of the oncoming attacks, instead enacting on a new plan to draw the conflict to a close. NEDF Obsidian Division Officer Tsukishiro Yanagi would become an integral factor on ending this war. Being sent into the frozen encampments deep behind the enemy front lines, Yanagi had been tasked with directly infiltrating and assassinating the Oni rebel leader, in hopes of her death forcing them into a ceasefire. However, while she was there, her plans would slip after being captured by a group of Oni tribesmen, after discovering that her body was shielding over a tiny little Soukaku. The tribals had shouted that this was an act of trying to kill Soukaku rather than save her, and would drag her into the front of the chieftain herself in hopes of finding that the trespassing woman would be executed. While we sadly don't know her real name, the Oni leader, aka the sister of Soukaku, had fallen gravely ill to a deep inflicted wound. Living with only borrowed time left, Yanagi and Sis would reach a fatal agreement. Yanagi would swear by her own blood and flesh to help rally and protect the Oni people. In fact, Yanagi deeply regretted taking this mission in the first place, and had even fought back on taking on the assignment, something that Sis most likely caught wind of, and would allow her to complete the assignment regardless, and thus ending her life in the hopes of better days for her people. With the binding of both the tribal leader's blood and the blood of Yanagi, the idea of unity and understanding demanded to be born. This wasn't just a beautiful constructed message by the two of them, but instead a vision of hope. The Oni, after witnessing the transfusion, understood her new role in life. Seeing her now bound as the new Oni war chief and as speaker of their people, Yanagi would take little Soukaku home with her, and would soon ignite a huge change in history for New Eridu. So did the Oni get their rights back after this, or are they still living in the outskirts? These events are still a little muddy in understanding, so there is going to be some theory crafting. However, given on the idea of just how things have seemingly played out, Yanagi absolutely had fought back on the civil stances regarding on how the world had looked at the Oni. It seems that with her new place at being both a human and the speaker of the tribes, both factions saw some sort of leniency on how they have seen each other. However, not entirely. New Eridu still does not see Oni as a citizen of the city, and still has very strict legal documents against Oni culture and concerns of their race. Though I believe that there is a good possibility that they aren't necessarily seen as second class, but now rather as a protected civilization of sorts, most likely having their own land and ways of securing their own way of life from being eroded from the city. This would explain why we still don't really see any Oni pretty much at all in the world while we play. Plus, Soukaku being a literal pop cultural icon, the newly founded Section 6 team probably had a huge weight on making tension easier. But what do you think? Do you think Oni should be allowed citizenship, or is their tribal culture and extreme strength shows that they are way too dangerous? Remember, Soukaku can literally eat you if she wanted to. In fact, they outright warn you of her severe cravings if she were to starve, which is sort of scary. Anyways, everyone, leave your thoughts down below in the comments and become a lore samurai today. Plus, while you're here, check out our lore focused Discord server with over 400 people, live lore discussions, art sections, and much more. Anyways, everyone, I shall see you all in the hollows. Sekai out.